So imagine this. Back in 2016, a guy takes out a loan against his actual house to pay off a porn star.
Right.
Right.
He goes to federal prison for it.
Exactly. He goes to federal prison. But then 8 years later, the man who actually ordered that payment not only avoids prison entirely, but he uses the Oval Office to charter his own, multi-billion-dollar crypto bank.
Backed by the Middle East, no less.
Backed by the Middle East. I mean, how does a politician go from hiding a $130,000 check to legally printing billions of dollars?
It's quite the trajectory.
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today, we're taking this massive stack of documents you sent us. So we've got court filings, historical archives, the Washington Post databases, and these incredibly detailed financial reports running right up to August 2026.
Yeah, there's a lot here to unpack.
Tons. And we're going to use all this to map out how the rules of, politics, law, and presidential power were just fundamentally rewritten.
Right, because we're looking at the sheer volume of legal actions surrounding Donald Trump and how the presidency itself kind of became this shield against criminal consequences.
Yeah, and of course, the sheer scale of the personal wealth generated by his family's new crypto ventures.
It is a staggering timeline when you really lay it all out because, you can't just look at the financial documents in a vacuum.
No, of course not.
And you can't look at the court records in a vacuum either. You really have to understand how the legal strategy necessitated the political strategy.
Right.
And how that political strategy eventually unlocked this totally unprecedented financial strategy. It's really a closed loop system.
Okay, so before we jump into the mechanics of all this, I do need to make a quick but really critical note here.
Yeah, definitely important to mention.
The sources you provided today, they contain some highly politically charged material. So we want to make it absolutely clear to you, the listener, that we are not taking any sides here.
Right. We're impartially reporting on the content provided.
Exactly. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of these sources. We are simply conveying the idea, the facts and the timelines that are contained within the original source material you shared with us.
Just laying out the facts.
It's just the facts.
Right.
Okay, let's get into this. Because looking over these documents, it's like, I don't know, it's like watching someone walk into a high-stakes casino, right? But instead of playing the games, they just managed to buy the casino.
Buy the casino, change the rules mid-hand.
Yeah, and then start issuing their own poker chips.
That is the exact trajectory we're tracing today. And, to understand that final act, where they literally start issuing their own digital poker chips with a federal bank charter, you first have to understand the environment that made that possible.
Right, the setup.
Exactly. You have to understand how a political figure actually survives 88 criminal charges.
And 34 felony convictions.
Right. And that begins with a communication strategy that was literally designed to completely overwhelm the public's cognitive ability to process what is happening.
Let's start right there, actually, with the sheer volume of information. Because if you read through the Washington Post database you shared with us, they kept a running tally during Trump's first term.
They did.
And their final number for false or misleading claims over those 4 years was 30,573.
30,000, which breaks down to roughly 21 false claims every single day for 4 years straight.
That's just exhausting to even think about.
It is. But if you look closer at the data, you see it wasn't a steady stream. It was more of an escalating tactical deployment.
Yeah, the timeline on the escalation is what really caught my eye in these sources. In year one, they tracked about 6 false claims a day.
Which back then everyone thought was insane.
Right. I mean, in his first 100 days, the count was 492. But then by year 2, that daily average jumps to 16.
And year 3, it hits 22.
And in his final year in office, it just skyrocketed to an average of 39 false or misleading claims every single day.
And there's that one specific date in the sources, right?
Yes. July 9, 2020. On that single day, the Washington Post recorded 62 false claims.
62 in one day.
Yeah, and half of them came from just one sit-down interview with Sean Hannity. He was repeatedly pushing claims about Barack Obama and Joe Biden spying on his campaign and claiming to have tremendous support in the African-American community.
So think about the physical mechanics of that for a moment. If you are a journalist or, a fact checker or just a normal citizen trying to follow the news,
Right.
How do you process 62 separate pieces of misinformation in a 24-hour period? By the time you research, write, and publish a correction for claim number 1, the subject has already generated claims 2 through 20.
See, but that's what I don't understand. If everyone knows these statements are false, why keep making them?
Well,
Take the economy, for example. The sources highlight his favorite claim about having, quote, the best economy in the history of the world.
right, he said that a lot.
Yeah, and when the pandemic hit and the economy objectively crashed, he didn't stop saying it. He just shifted to saying he had achieved the best economy in the history of the world. Why double down when the reality is right outside everyone's window?
That's the thing.
Doesn't a lie eventually backfire if you just repeat it too much?
Not if you fundamentally change the objective of the lie. The sources reference a propaganda model called the fire hose of falsehood.
The fire hose of falsehood.
Yeah. And the Mother Jones piece in your stack explicitly likens this to an autocratic playbook utilized by Vladimir Putin.
Oh, wow.
See, the goal of a traditional political lie is to persuade the listener that a specific alternate fact is true. But the goal of the fire hose is entirely different. It isn't designed to convince you.
Okay, so what's it designed to do?
It's designed to exhaust you.
Oh, it's like trying to play a game of chess, but every 10 seconds your opponent just dumps a bucket of ping pong balls onto the board.
Yes, that is a perfect way to visualize it. You aren't losing because they have a better strategy.
You're losing because you have to spend all your time clearing the board just to see where the pieces are.
Exactly. And we see this analyzed formally in the International Journal of Communication. Researchers conducted a lexical pattern study on his tweets.
So they weren't just looking at true or false.
No, they were analyzing the actual linguistic structure. And they found significant evidence of a clear, calculated intent to deceive.
So it wasn't just him misspeaking.
Right. This wasn't a politician accidentally putting a positive spin on a bad poll number. It was the deliberate construction of a counter-narrative, the strategic deployment of what they famously called alternative facts.
And looking at the specific tweets cited in the research, it really is just a relentless barrage, claiming Apple was bringing massive amounts of money back to the U.S. because of his tax cuts.
Right.
Labeling the Russia investigation a rigged witch hunt run by 13 angry and heavily conflicted Democrats, calling the press the enemy of the people.
Which creates an impossible trap for mainstream journalism.
How so?
Well, the traditional journalistic paradigm relies on quoting public officials, right? But if the press quotes the lie, they are actively distributing the falsehood to millions of people.
I see.
But if they stop quoting the official, they're accused of censorship.
Right.
And if they constantly call it a lie, they're accused of partisan bias. So the whole system is just short-circuited.
It's like Steve Bannon was quoted saying in that Vox article you shared, the strategy is to flood the zone with shit.
Exactly. It's about inducing apathy, because if everything is a lie, and if every institution is corrupt, then nothing really matters.
And that apathy was basically the necessary soil to plant the most consequential falsehood of his political career. Right. The big lie.
Precisely. The daily erosion of objective reality over 4 years made it entirely possible to construct the narrative that the 2020 election was stolen.
The historians in the documents, like Timothy Snyder, they point out that this massive election fraud narrative is a textbook propaganda technique.
Yeah, you condition the audience to reject institutional truth, and then you just deliver a massive system-breaking falsehood.
So the fire hose of falsehood wasn't just, a quirky character trait or some ego trip.
Not at all.
If we look at the timeline, it functions as this massive smokescreen. Because while everyone is arguing about a tweet or fact-checking an inauguration crowd size, there is a staggering volume of documented criminality happening behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Let's look at the actual ledger books, because the contrast between the public noise and the private paperwork is just incredible.
The paperwork is where the narrative actually hits the legal system, and the most significant date in all these documents is May 30, 2024.
Right. The day Donald Trump becomes the first U.S. president ever to be convicted of a felony.
Found guilty by a New York jury on 34 separate counts of falsifying business records in the first degree.
But I want to really dig into the mechanics of this, because we hear hush money and we think of like guys in trench coats handing over briefcases of cash in an alley.
Right, very cinematic.
Yeah, but the reality is a lot more bureaucratic. How exactly did they execute this?
Well, it stems from the weeks just before the 2016 election. The campaign was in crisis mode, and they needed to execute a catch-and-kill strategy regarding an alleged 2006 sexual encounter with adult film actress Stormy Daniels.
And the person tasked with making this problem go away was Michael Cohen.
Right, the personal lawyer and self-described fixer. And the price tag for Stormy Daniels' silence was $130,000.
But Cohen doesn't just walk into a bank, withdraw 130 grand from the Trump campaign account, and wire it over.
Okay.
I mean, that would be a massive flashing red light for the Federal Election Commission.
Oh, absolutely. An undeclared $130,000 campaign contribution would be immediately flagged. So Cohen acts as a financial cutout to hide the origin of the money.
Okay.
The court documents show that he utilized a HLOC, a home equity line of credit.
Wait, I want to pause on that because that is such a specific and revealing detail. If you're listening to this and wondering why on earth the FEC or the IRS didn't catch this immediately, this is why.
Exactly.
If a campaign cuts a check, there's a digital paper trail tied directly to a political action committee.
Right.
But by using a ELOC, Cohen is borrowing against the bricks and mortar of his own personal house.
Right. To a bank auditor or to anyone looking at the transaction, it just looks like a guy taking out a personal loan to, remodel his kitchen or put a pool in the backyard.
It is completely invisible to campaign finance regulators.
It creates a firewall.
Yeah.
But he didn't stop there. He didn't just wire the money from his personal checking account to Daniel's lawyer.
What did he do?
The sources show he funneled that HELSC money through a shell company he incorporated in Delaware called Essential Consultants, LLC.
Delaware. Notoriously friendly to corporate secrecy.
Very much so. It's very difficult to look up who actually owns an LLC registered there.
Okay, so Cohen leverages his house, moves the money through a dark LLC in Delaware, and buys the non-disclosure agreement. Problem solved for the campaign.
For the campaign, yes.
But Cohen isn't a charity. He expects to be paid back. And this is where the math in these source documents absolutely fascinated me.
The gross up.
Yes. Trump didn't just reimburse him $130,000. He wrote checks totaling $420,000. What is the extra $290 grand for? That is a massive markup.
Well, the $420,000 figure is basically the smoking gun of premeditation. Because you can't just write a check to your fixer with the memo line, reimbursement for illegal campaign contribution.
Obviously not.
They had to disguise the reimbursement as legitimate income for legal services. But the moment you declare a payment as income, the IRS wants its cut.
Oh, I see. So if he just gave Cohen the 130 grand and called it income, Cohen would have to pay taxes on it and he'd end up in the red.
Precisely. They had to gross up the payment to cover the tax burden, so they doubled the $130,000 to $260,000.
Okay, so 260. Then what?
Then, according to the documents, they added $50,000 that Cohen claimed he was owed for manipulating some online tech polls to boost Trump's status.
Wow. Okay, so now we are at 310,000.
Right. And they doubled that $50,000 for taxes as well, bringing it to $360,000.
And the rest.
Finally, they tossed in a year-end bonus of $60,000. Grand total, $420,000.
It's just simple, cold corporate accounting applied to a criminal cover-up.
Yep.
And the way they paid it out is what triggered the 34 felonies.
Yeah.
They didn't pay it in a lump sum. The ledger shows they structured it in monthly installments of $35,000 throughout the year 2017.
Which means this was happening while Donald Trump was sitting in the Oval Office. The sitting president of the United States was signing checks to reimburse a fixer for an illegal scheme. And the Trump Organization was fraudulently logging these monthly payments as legal expenses under a retainer agreement.
An agreement that, importantly, did not exist.
Exactly. Every single one of those fake invoices, every voucher entered into the general ledger, and every check signed constituted a separate false business record. Hence, the 34 counts.
And who was physically processing these fake invoices? The sources point heavily to Alan Weisselberg.
Yes, the longtime chief financial officer and bookkeeper for the Trump Organization.
Right. Weisselberg is a fascinating figure here because he was basically the architect of the financial plumbing.
He was. The boss might give the order, but the CFO has to figure out which accounts the money comes from, how it's categorized, and who actually cuts the check. Michael Cohen testified that it was Weisselberg who arranged for the Trump Organization to pay those installments.
Yeah, we read in the source documents that the former controller, Jeffrey McConney, testified that Weisselberg explicitly instructed him to make the reimbursement payments in 2017.
Weisselberg even signed some of those checks himself.
But when the federal investigation heated up, didn't Weisselberg try to save himself?
He did, yeah. In July 2018, he was subpoenaed to testify before a federal grand jury regarding the Cohen investigation. and he was actually granted limited witness immunity for his testimony.
Meaning what he said in that room couldn't be used against him federally.
Right. However, that federal immunity did not protect him from state charges later on, and he eventually found himself serving time in Rikers Island.
Which highlights a pattern that is almost hard to comprehend until you see the list all in one place. The sheer magnitude of the corruption resulted in a roster of convicted felons that is entirely unprecedented for an American political figure.
It really is. We aren't just talking about a low-level staffer getting caught up in a technicality here.
No. Look at this list from your sources. Paul Manafort, the campaign chairman, convicted felon. Michael Flynn, the national security advisor, convicted felon. Roger Stone, a longtime political advisor, convicted felon. Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer, convicted felon.
And Michael Cohen, the personal attorney, convicted felon.
And finally, Donald Trump himself, convicted felon.
When you look at that list, you have to ask a fundamental question about the nature of the executive branch during this era. What happens to the functioning of the American government when the inner circle is populated by individuals who operate with such a blatant, documented disregard for the law?
It's crazy.
It goes far beyond partisan politics or ideological disagreements. It speaks to a culture of systemic illegality where the mechanisms of power are viewed primarily as tools to facilitate personal goals and then immediately weaponized to cover up the resulting liabilities.
So you have this entire network of fixers and advisors who are getting indicted, flipping, pleading guilty, or going to prison. The walls are completely closing in.
Oh,
And the boss at the center of it all is looking at a tidal wave of his own legal jeopardy. We are talking about 88 federal and state charges across 4 separate indictments.
it's an insurmountable amount of legal pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care who your lawyers are, you can't beat 88 charges in 4 different jurisdictions through standard legal defense. The liability is just too massive.
Standard legal defense was never going to be sufficient. If you are a private citizen facing the full weight of the Department of Justice, a district attorney in New York, and a district attorney in Georgia.
The statistical likelihood of prison is overwhelming.
Overwhelming. The only viable strategy to evade catastrophic legal consequences was to acquire a legal shield that the justice system simply could not pierce.
The presidency.
Yes.
This is what the timeline in these documents makes so clear to me. The 2024 presidential campaign wasn't just a political endeavor. It was a literal high-stakes legal defense strategy.
The campaign trail and the courtroom became the exact same thing.
Exactly. Let's map out exactly what he was facing, because the evasion timeline is arguably the most remarkable sequence of events in modern legal history.
Okay, so he faced 4 indictments. First, the New York hush money case, which we just discussed, resulting in those 34 felony convictions.
Right.
Second, the Georgia election racketeering case, which investigated efforts to overturn the 2020 election results in that state.
Third was the federal classified documents case down in Florida, right? Concerning the illegal retention of highly sensitive national security secrets at Mar-a-Lago.
Correct. And fourth, the federal election obstruction case in Washington, D.C., led by special counsel Jack Smith, looking at the fake electors plot and the events leading up to January 6th.
88 charges. Now, let's look at the timeline after the November 2024 election victory, because the speed at which these legal walls, which took years of grand juries investigations to build, just completely dissolved, is breathtaking.
The dissolution was systematic, and it relied on a combination of executive authority, institutional DOJ policy, and a highly favorable judiciary.
The dominoes started falling almost immediately, didn't they?
They did. On November 25, 2024, just weeks after the election, special counsel Jack Smith moves to dismiss the federal election interference case in D.C.
Just dropped it. Years of work, massive grand jury testimony, and he just drops it. And that's entirely because of a Department of Justice memo.
Correct. It relies on a long-standing DOJ Office of Legal Counsel policy that dictates you cannot prosecute a sitting president, because doing so would unconstitutionally interfere with the executive branch's ability to perform its duties.
So the moment he won the election, that federal case was effectively dead.
Completely dead.
But the New York case was state level. The DOJ policy doesn't apply there. And he was already convicted in May 2024. He was just waiting to be sentenced. What happened there?
Well, the sentencing was repeatedly delayed and eventually suspended after his victory. And the sources state that on January 10th, 2025, he was sentenced to an unconditional discharge.
An unconditional discharge for 34 felony convictions. I really want to contrast this with Michael Cohen for a second, because the disparity is glaring. According to these documents, Cohen pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations regarding these exact same hush money payments.
He did.
And in his admission of guilt, Cohen explicitly stated under oath that he acted, quote, at the direction of a candidate for federal office.
Right.
Cohen went to federal prison for 3 years behind bars for following the orders of the candidate, while the candidate himself reclaims the presidency and receives an unconditional discharge for orchestrating the exact same cover-up.
It is the ultimate manifestation of a two-tiered justice system. The person who facilitates the crime is incarcerated, while the person who ordered it and who holds political power faces zero consequence.
And this pattern repeated with the federal classified documents case in Florida, too.
It did.
Let's talk about Florida, because the legal maneuver there was wild.
Yeah.
Judge Aileen Cannon dismissed the classified documents case on July 15, 2024. And the sources say she did it by questioning the constitutionality of the special counsel's appointment.
That's right.
But wait, I'm confused here. Special counsels have been used for decades. Robert Mueller, Ken Starr, Archibald Cox. How did a judge suddenly rule that the very concept of a special counsel is unconstitutional? What was the actual legal argument?
It was a highly controversial ruling that completely flew in the face of decades of precedent. The defense argued, and Judge Cannon agreed, that Jack Smith's appointment violated the Appointments Clause of the Constitution.
Okay, meaning what?
The argument was that because Smith was not confirmed by the Senate, and because there was no specific statute passed by Congress explicitly creating his office, the Attorney General did not have the authority to appoint him and grant him the sweeping prosecutorial powers of a U.S. attorney.
So she essentially ruled that the prosecutor didn't legally exist, therefore the prosecution must be thrown out.
Exactly. It was a massive victory for the defense. And while the Department of Justice initially planned to appeal that decision after the 2024 election victory, the DOJ simply withdrew its appeal.
The case was dead.
Dead.
And what about all the evidence Jack Smith collected? The special counsel spent years investigating the classified documents and the election subversion. He compiled a massive final report.
Well, the sources indicate a judge permanently blocked its release to the public.
Permanently blocked. But we do have some details on what was in it from the First Amendment encyclopedia source in the stack, right?
Yeah.
What were they actually going to charge him with in D.C. before the DOJ dropped it?
We know the grand jury found probable cause to indict him on severe foundational charges. Conspiring to obstruct the government function of selecting and certifying the president, obstructing the official proceeding of Congress on January 6th, and conspiring to violate the federal rights of citizens to vote and have their votes counted.
These aren't business records charges. These are crimes against the democratic system itself.
Yes, but the comprehensive report detailing the evidentiary backing for those charges is permanently blocked from the public eye.
So the shield worked. When the presidency successfully killed the federal cases via DOJ policy and favorable judges, and it neutralized the state cases.
It did. But the cornerstone of this entire legal evasion strategy, the thing that really cemented the shield, was the Supreme Court immunity argument in the case Trump v. United States.
Yeah, I read the summary of this in the documents, and it is a staggering legal contortion.
It is arguably one of the most consequential Supreme Court decisions regarding executive power in American history. The defense essentially argued that the president is absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for official acts taken while in office.
Okay, I understand the concept that a president shouldn't be sued if they make a tough call on a military strike. But how on earth did they argue that trying to overturn an election or organizing a slate of fake electors was an official act?
To understand that, you have to look at the specific argument presented by defense attorney John Lauro as detailed in our sources.
What did he say?
He argued that Trump's claims of electoral irregularities, his pressure on the Department of Justice to investigate baseless fraud claims, and even the orchestration of the fake electors plot. None of this was a candidate trying to steal an election.
Oh, come on. What did he claim it was?
Lauro argued that this was the President of the United States engaging in efforts to ensure election integrity.
That is incredible. By that logic, using the apparatus of the government to subvert the will of the voters is redefined as protecting the voters.
Correct. And ensuring election integrity, Lauro argued, falls squarely under the official duties of the executive branch. They heavily cited the precedent of Nixon v. Fitzgerald, a 1982 case which established that the president is entitled to absolute immunity from civil liability for acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility.
So Lauro essentially asked the court to extend that civil immunity shield to criminal prosecution.
Exactly.
It's Orwellian. You take the very act of subversion, rebrand it as a presidential duty, and suddenly it's protected by the Constitution.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court essentially hands him a bulletproof vest. But here's what the financial documents from 2025 and 2026 made me wonder.
What's that?
Once you're wearing that vest, and you're sitting in the Oval Office, immune from prosecution, and the DOJ is completely subservient, you don't just sit there. You use that newly acquired invulnerability.
You do.
And according to the Treasury documents from August 2026, he used it to build a bank.
This is the transition from legal survival to unprecedented personal enrichment. Once the threat of prison was neutralized, the immense machinery of the executive branch was freed up to be monetized on a scale we have never seen.
It's wild.
We are moving from hiding $130,000 hush money payments to chartering a multi-billion-dollar financial institution.
Let's look at the exact timeline in the Treasury documents. August 14th, 2026. This move fundamentally blurs the line between the United States government and a private family business.
It absolutely does.
The Treasury Department grants conditional approval for a company called World Liberty Trust Company to become a chartered bank.
A chartered bank owned by the Trump family.
Let me just make sure I have the mechanics of this right, because it sounds almost too blatant to be real. The President of the United States appoints the officials at the Treasury Department.
Right.
And those same Treasury officials then turn around and grant a highly coveted, incredibly lucrative federal banking charter to a private cryptocurrency company owned by the president himself.
That is precisely what the sources describe, and the purpose of this bank's charter is highly specific and highly profitable.
Okay, walk me through it.
The approval gives World Liberty the right to act as a custodian for digital assets and, crucially, to issue a type of cryptocurrency called a stablecoin.
Okay, for those of us who don't spend our days trading crypto, what exactly is a stablecoin, and why does issuing one require a federal bank charter?
A stablecoin is a digital currency designed to have a stable value, usually pegged one-to-one with the traditional fiat currency like the US dollar.
So one coin equals $1.
Right. People use them to trade in and out of volatile cryptos like Bitcoin without having to constantly move money back into a traditional bank.
Makes sense.
But to maintain that one-to-one peg, the company issuing the stablecoin has to hold vast reserves of actual dollars or ultra-safe assets like U.S. Treasury bills.
So if I buy 1 million World Liberty stablecoins, they have to hold 1 million actual U.S. dollars in a vault somewhere to back it up.
Exactly. But here is where the profit mechanism kicks in. They don't just let those real dollars sit in a vault doing nothing.
What do they do?
Well, when you have a bank charter, you can directly interface with the traditional financial system. World Liberty takes the client's U.S. dollars, buys yield-bearing assets like Treasury bills, and earns a massive amount of interest on those reserves.
Wow.
Meanwhile, they pay little to no interest to the people actually holding the digital stablecoins.
It's essentially a license to print digital money, backed by the credibility of a U.S. bank charter, where the issuer pockets all the interest on the underlying cash.
And the profits flow directly to the Trump family.
How is this legally or ethically permissible for a sitting president? The conflicts of interest are astronomical. What does the White House say about this?
Well, the sources include a statement from White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly defending the arrangement. She claims that the president only acts in the best interests of the American public.
Okay.
And she explicitly states that there are no conflicts of interest because the president's assets are held in a blind trust.
A blind trust. Okay, let's define the mechanics of a blind trust, because that term is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting in her statement.
It really is.
Normally, if a politician puts their assets in a blind trust, it means they hand their portfolio over to a completely independent third-party financial trustee.
Right, someone with no ties to the family.
Exactly. The politician has no idea what stocks the trustee is buying or selling, so the politician can't make policy decisions that secretly benefit their specific investments. It's blind.
The entire purpose is independence and lack of knowledge. But the documents in your stack dissect the absurdity of this claim regarding World Liberty.
Yeah, this so-called blind trust is managed by his own sons, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump. They are the co-founders of World Liberty.
So it's not blind and it's not independent. It's literally his kids.
Just his kids.
Furthermore, they are actively, aggressively, and publicly promoting these ventures. The sources note that Donald Trump Jr. and Eric actively promoted a related venture called WorldClaw on the social media platform X.
I read that. Don Jr. even announced he would personally meet with winners of a World Claw contest at Mar-a-Lago, the family's private club in Florida.
Yeah.
And Eric Trump hailed the collaboration as the future of finance.
Yeah.
So the president appoints the Treasury regulators. The regulators grant a banking charter to a company owned by the president. The company is run by his sons, who are throwing promotional crypto contests on social media and offering meetings at the president's private golf club as a prize.
It's quite a setup.
That's not a blind trust, that's a family business operating with a presidential seal of approval.
And we have to consider the macroeconomic implications of this arrangement, too. You have a sitting U.S. president with a massive vested financial interest in an alternative private digital currency that essentially competes with, or at least parallels, the U.S. dollar.
Right.
The policy decisions the president makes regarding cryptocurrency regulation, taxation, and central banking are now directly tied to the valuation of his own family's digital bank.
It's breathtaking. But to truly understand why they pivoted so hard into stablecoins, you just have to look at the raw numbers. Let's trace the billions, because the ledger of gains here is unlike anything we have ever seen in the history of American politics.
The financial disclosures from the sources provide exact staggering figures. According to those disclosures, Donald Trump made over $1.4 billion from crypto ventures in 2025 alone.
$1.4 billion in a single year.
And since returning to the White House, the reporting indicates he personally made nearly $800 million from his crypto company.
Just endless money.
If you combine all these related ventures, the total family crypto revenue sits at a massive $2.3 billion.
Those numbers are astronomical.
Yeah.
And that's just revenue, right? What about the valuation of the entities themselves?
When World Liberty Financial effectively went public, securing its valuation based on its token value in its first days, it secured a valuation of around $5 billion.
$5 billion generated almost overnight by securing a federal charter. But where is this massive influx of money coming from? Who is investing billions of dollars into a bank owned by a sitting U.S. president?
This is where we shift from what you might call traditional domestic corruption to sovereign-level monetization.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, the sources reveal that a state-backed Abu Dhabi investment firm named MGX injected $2 billion into the company in May 2025.
$2 billion from a sovereign wealth fund of a foreign nation, injected directly into a private financial institution owned by the family of the sitting president of the United States.
It raises an immensely complicated set of geopolitical questions. A sovereign wealth fund is a state-owned investment fund. It is an extension of a foreign government.
Right. It's not just a private equity group.
Exactly. So how does a $2 billion investment from the United Arab Emirates influence U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East? How does it affect arms sales, diplomatic support, or trade agreements?
It's impossible to separate.
If you look at his first term, the investigations into Trump's wealth, like the civil fraud case, led by New York Attorney General Letitia James, focused on hiding tax returns, inflating the square footage of a penthouse to get better loan rates from Deutsche Bank, and running a fraudulent charity.
That is traditional, almost pedestrian corruption.
Yeah, lying about the size of an apartment to get a lower interest rate is basically real estate grift 101.
Right.
But in the second term, empowered by legal immunity, he has established a globally funded financial institution chartered by his own Treasury Department. It is a completely different scale of operation. It monetizes the sovereign power of the United States.
The defense from the company is fascinating, though. The spokesperson said, quote, "Critics are missing the point. World Liberty Financial is running towards regulation and continuous oversight, not away from it."
Which is quite a spin.
Yeah, I have to push back on that. Are critics really missing the point? Or is the point that they now control the regulators? It is incredibly easy to say you welcome regulation when you are the one appointing the head of the SEC and the Secretary of the Treasury. You aren't running toward regulation. You have captured the regulatory apparatus.
Regulatory capture is exactly what the documents outline. And it's not just World Liberty. We also have to look at Trump Media and Technology Group, the parent company of Truth Social, trading under the ticker DJT.
Oh, right. The Motley Fool source document provides a deep dive into how that company also pivoted to try and capitalize on the crypto wave, though with Wildly different results.
Yeah, this was a fascinating side plot in the documents. Last summer, Trump media made headlines by announcing plans to transform itself into a Bitcoin treasury company.
They were mirroring the strategy of companies like MicroStrategy, which essentially operate as holding companies for Bitcoin.
Right, and Trump media followed through on the promise, acquiring 12,062 Bitcoins. At the time the report was generated, that holding was valued at nearly $755 million.
But the timing of that purchase was a disaster, right? The Motley Fool analysis points out that the Bitcoin position is currently deep underwater.
Remarkably poor timing. Trump media bought into Bitcoin right around the time it hit an all-time high of $126,000 per coin.
Oh, man.
And as the price of Bitcoin declined over the next 10 months, dropping down to around 63,000 or 64,000 as noted in the report, DJT was forced to report a $190 million paper loss on its crypto holdings.
Ouch, buying at the absolute top of the market.
The analyst from Motley Fool, Dominic Basulto, highlights this as a classic error of a company trying to time a highly volatile crypto market rather than focusing on its core product.
Makes sense.
Because of these massive paper losses, Trump media actually announced it would pivot away from Bitcoin and try to focus back on its core business of media and advertising.
It shows that even with all the regulatory capture, they aren't immune to market forces when they speculate on existing tokens.
Sure.
But even with a $190 million paper loss on Truth Social's balance sheet, you zoom out, and the sheer volume of wealth generated by the family through world liberty is just staggering.
The contrast over the decade is the most striking takeaway from this entire stack of sources.
It really is. I keep going back to that initial comparison we made. In 2016, a $130,000 hush money payment hidden through a home equity line of credit and a Delaware shell company sparked a decade of legal trouble, massive federal investigations, indictments, and 34 felony convictions.
And the guy who facilitated it went to federal prison.
Right. And fast forward to 2025 and 2026, a $2 billion cash injection from a foreign government into a crypto bank owned by the president is entirely legal under the new charter granted by his own administration.
The mechanisms of the state were fundamentally adapted to not only shield the behavior from criminal prosecution, but to legalize and actually facilitate the enrichment.
It is a remarkable evolution of power. We started this deep dive looking at a communication strategy, the 30,000 false claims, the daily fire hose of falsehood designed to exhaust the public and flood the zone with noise.
And we saw how that smokescreen covered a systemic network of criminality, resulting in a cabinet populated by convicted felons, from the campaign chair to the CFO, and ultimately the first felony conviction of a sitting or former U.S. president.
Then we mapped how the pursuit of the presidency itself was utilized as the ultimate legal shield. We saw the rapid dismantling of 88 federal and state charges, culminating in an unconditional discharge for those 34 felonies.
All made possible by the application of a sweeping Supreme Court immunity doctrine that literally redefined subversion as an official duty.
And finally, we traced how, once the threat of prison was neutralized by that shield, the immense sovereign power of the presidency was leveraged to generate billions of dollars through a family-run crypto bank chartered by the U.S. Treasury and funded by foreign states.
It is an incredible, unprecedented arc in American history. And again, remember, you provided us with this stack of documents. We're simply laying out the facts, the timelines, the legal maneuvers, and the financial figures reported in these sources without taking a political side.
Just following the paper trail.
Exactly. The documents tell a clear, chronological story of how the boundaries between public office and private enterprise, between criminal legal defense and political campaigning, have been entirely erased.
It leaves you with a massive question about the future of the office. If a sitting U.S. president can successfully charter a private bank to issue a digital currency parallel to the U.S. dollar, backed by the sovereign wealth of a foreign nation, at what point does the president stop being a public servant and effectively become a competing sovereign nation of his own? Think about that next time you look at a dollar bill. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.